How Portugal's spice monopoly created the first global debt trap before Britain. You are 8,000 miles from home. The mast is snapping. Half your crew is dead from scurvy. You have a chest full of peppercorns. And your entire family's future is collateral on a loan from a man you've never met in a city you've never seen. This is the true engine of the age of discovery. Not curiosity, not glory, debt. A secret deal made in Lisbon in 1499 between a nearly bankrupt king and a syndicate of Genoese bankers. A deal that would mortgage a kingdom to buy a monopoly on the known world. They didn't just find a new trade route. They invented the first global debt trap. And for 100 years, they used it to strangle the economies of Asia, turning ancient empires into tributaries, before the blueprint was stolen by the Dutch and British to build the modern financial world. If you understand this deal, you understand the hidden architecture of power. The question history books will tell you Portugal was a pioneer, a small nation that boldly sailed into the unknown. That is a fairy tale. The real question is, how did the poorest kingdom in Europe, with a population smaller than modern-day Rhode Island, conquer the entire Indian Ocean trade network in less than 20 years? The answer isn't in their caravels. It's in their ledgers. Welcome to Economic Historian. This is the story of the first corporate takeover of the world, and the financial weapon that made it possible. Acti, the desperate kingdom and the banker's gamble, the loan that launched 1,000 ships. Portugal, 1499. King Manuela is in a panic. Vasco da Gama has just returned. He's found the sea route to India. He's also brought back a brutal report. The spice trade is already a mature, hyper-efficient network dominated by Arab, Indian, and Venetian merchants. To break in, Portugal can't just show up. It has to declare war on the entire economic system of the East. But Portugal is broke. A century of war in North Africa has emptied the treasury. The population is exhausted. They have the key to the world's wealth, but no money to turn it. Enter the true architects of empire, the bankers of Genoa and Augsburg. Men like Bartolomeo Marchani and the Fugger family. They are the venture capitalists of the 16th century. They see da Gama's cargo, a handful of spices that sell for a 3,000% profit. And they don't see risk. They see an arbitrage opportunity of biblical proportions. They make King Manuel an offer. We will finance your entire armada. You will conquer the trade, and we will take our cut off the top before a single coin reaches your royal coffers. This is the pivotal, hidden moment. The Portuguese crown sells future shares in conquests that haven't happened yet. The Carrara de India, the annual fleet, becomes a floating securitized debt instrument. Every cannon, every sack of rice for the crew is paid for with borrowed money at Italian interest rates. The pressure is immediate and insane. Every ship that returns must carry enough spice to pay back the principal plus the interest, plus fund the next year's fleet, or the kingdom defaults. There is no room for diplomacy, no room for fair trade. From its very first voyage, the Portuguese enterprise in Asia is not a state project. It is a high-leverage, predatory hedge fund with a navy. Let's be clear about the math. A single Portuguese now, or carrack, cost the equivalent of a modern battleship to build, outfit, and crew. A fleet required capital equal to multiple years of the kingdom's entire tax revenue. The Genoese didn't just lend money, they provided the entire logistical network, the shipyards in Lisbon, the trade goods for barter, the insurance. They were silent partners who controlled the purse strings. The famous Portuguese navigators were, in financial terms, just high-risk employees of a banking consortium. Their courage was real, but it was funded by a cold calculation of compound interest. The contract, the contratu, stipulated that the crown's share of the spices would first go to repay the bankers, with the crown often taking a loss on early voyages. Portugal wasn't exploring. It was working a deadly, high-seas debt gig. Act 2. The fortified Tollbooth system, the real Game of Thrones, was a game of tolls. So how do you secure a 3,000% return for your investors when you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1? You don't try to control the field. You control the gate. Portugal's genius was geostrategic minimalism. Look at a map of their empire. It's a string of dots. Mozambique, Hormuz, Goa, Malacca, Macau. Each dot is a fortress built at the narrowest choke point of a major trade route. The Strait of Hormuz, the entrance to the Red Sea, the Malacca Strait. These forts, for Zoto da India, were not towns. They were customs houses with cannons. Here's how it worked. Any merchant ship, Arab dhow, Indian dhow, Chinese junk, sailing from Gujarat to Sumatra had to pass Portuguese Malacca. They were stopped. They were presented with a cartaz, a passport. To get the cartaz, they had to pay a duty of 30-50% of their cargo's value. They had to promise not to trade in Portuguese spices like pepper or cinnamon, and they had to carry a Portuguese factor on board to ensure compliance. 2. Refuse. Your ship is confiscated, burned, or sunk. Your crew is enslaved. It was a protection racket on an oceanic scale. Portugal didn't produce a single peppercorn. They didn't need to. They became the world's first maritime toll collector. The entire wealth of the Indian Ocean, silks, spices, gems, now had to flow through their armed bottlenecks. The profits were so immense they called the voyage around Africa the Carrera de India, the India Run. But back in Genoa, the bankers called it, by a different name, the dividend run. This system relied on a terrifying simple piece of paper. The cartas, issued for a fee, it was a masterstroke of bureaucratic control. It specified the ship's cargo destination and crew, but its real power was psychological. It made every Asian merchant complicit in their own subjugation. To accept the cartas was to acknowledge Portuguese sovereignty over seas you and your ancestors had sailed for millennia. To trade without one was an act of war. The Portuguese didn't have enough ships to patrol everywhere, so they used exemplary violence. The burning of a single junk in a harbor would echo for months, making the cost of defiance existential. They turned the ocean from a commons into a gated community, where the price of entry was a hefty fee and your dignity. Debt trap thing, the debt trap vassalage, the master weapon, original debt trap diplomacy, but controlling the sea wasn't enough. To really monopolize the source, Portugal had to control the suppliers on land, and they didn't have the army for conquest. So, they used a financial virus, financial virus. Kingdom of Cojacode, Calicut. India. Upon arrival, the Portuguese didn't just attack. They studied the political landscape. They found a rival to the king of Cojacode, the Raja of Cochin. They approached the Raja with an offer: "We will lend you the money to raise an army and defeat your enemy. We will protect you with our ships. All we ask in return is the exclusive right to buy all the pepper in your kingdom. At a price we set?" It was a loan agreement with a monopoly clause. The Raja, desperate for power, signed. The Portuguese loan was not in gold. It was in military hardware and naval support. The Raja won, but the victory price was his sovereignty. The pepper harvest of Cochin belonged to Lisbon. The Raja couldn't sell to Arab traders, even if they offered double. When the next harvest was poor, he couldn't pay the loan back. The interest compounded. He had to borrow more, pledging next year's harvest and the next. Within a decade, the Raja was a puppet. His kingdom was a Portuguese spice plantation. His people were forced to grow pepper at fixed, low prices, while the Portuguese sold it in Europe for 50 times more. This model was replicated across the Indian Ocean, in Ceylon for cinnamon, in the Moluccas for cloves, in Persia for silk. Offer a loan to a local ruler, secure it with their primary export. Wait for default. Seize economic control. It wasn't colonialism. It was leveraged buyout, 16th century style. Portugal became the first global private equity firm, turning ancient kingdoms into debt-servicing subsidiaries. The true brutality was in the price fixing. After securing the monopoly, Portuguese factors would set the buying price impossibly low, often just above the cost of production for the farmer. The difference between this price and the market price in Europe, the monopoly rent, was pure profit. If a local ruler objected, the Portuguese could call in the loan, threaten to support his rival, or simply cut off his access to the lucrative cartas system for all his kingdom's other trade. They created a total dependency. The kingdom's treasury became reliant on the Portuguese advance payments, its military reliant on Portuguese gunships, and its elites' luxury goods reliant on Portuguese-issued trade permits. It was a cage built from debt, where the bars were financial, not iron. Active as a Trex in the fortress and the blueprint is stolen, the model was perfect. The managers were not. The system was financially brilliant, but it had a fatal flaw. The Portuguese, the crown treated the Estado da India as a corrupt, personal piggy bank. Officials, appointed for short 3-year terms called triennios, had one goal: extract as much personal wealth as possible before returning home. They engaged in rampant private trade, siphoning off the crown's profits. They brutalized local populations, alienating potential allies. The quality of their rule was summed up by the viceroy who said, "We came here for cinnamon and Christ. When the cinnamon runs out, we will leave." Meanwhile, the bankers in Genoa watched the profits plateau. The debt load was crushing. The system was leaking value at every seam due to corruption, and a new, hungrier, more disciplined competitor was rising: the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch didn't just copy the Portuguese model. They institutionalized and perfected it. They They saw Portugal's flaws: state corruption, short-term greed, a reliance on charismatic but unreliable viceroys. So, they created a joint stock company, a permanent, impersonal financial machine with a professional bureaucracy. They took the fortified Tollbooth model and made it more efficient, building better-armed, faster ships. They took the debt trap Vassalage and systematized it with binding, detailed treaties enforced by a standing corporate army. They funded it all by selling shares to the public on the Amsterdam Exchange, creating a permanent capital base that didn't rely on the whims of a single king or the patience of a few bankers. The VOC was capitalism incarnate, immoral, and endlessly hungry. In 1605, the Dutch captured the key Portuguese fortress of Ambon in the Spice Islands. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a corporate takeover. The Dutch didn't just seize the fort, they seized the spice trees and, crucially, the exclusive contracts with local rulers that came with them. They literally inherited Portugal's debtor kingdoms and inserted themselves into the existing debt traps. Portugal's 100-year monopoly ended not with a bang, but with a hostile acquisition. Their invention, the global debt trap monopoly, was now in the hands of a more ruthless, better capitalized, and professionally managed corporation. The blueprint was now the standard operating procedure for the next 400 years of Western imperialism. The Portuguese showed that sovereignty could be bought with debt. The Dutch, and later the British, built an entire global system on that principle. The legacy, the eternal debt trap, the ghost of the Casa de India, Portugal faded as a power, but its financial weapon never went away. It just evolved, its core logic adapting to new technologies and political landscapes. 18th century, the British East India Company uses the exact same debt trap model to take over Bengal after the Battle of Plassey. A loan to the Nawab, secured by future tax revenues, leads to default and de facto corporate rule. The subsidiary alliance system was pure Portuguese vassalage, rebranded. 19th century, the Opium Wars are Britain using gunboats to force China to accept a deadly commodity and pay indemnities, a direct echo of Portugal forcing Cartaz payments at Cannon Point. The unequal treaties that followed were monopoly contracts writ large. 20th century, the International Monetary Fund issues structural adjustment loans to developing nations. The conditions? Open your markets, sell your national assets, prioritize debt repayment over social spending. It's the Casa de India contract written in the sterile jargon of Washington consensus economics. The choke point is no longer a strait, but access to the US dollar financial system. 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative, loans for infrastructure in Africa and Asia, secured by strategic assets, ports, mines. When countries like Sri Lanka or Zambia struggle to pay, they face debt for equity swaps, handing over control of those assets. It's not a copy. It's a homage. Similarly, modern tech platform monopolies use a digital version of the Cartaz. You can access the market, the App Store, the Amazon Marketplace, but only if you pay a 30% fee and abide by our rules. The fortified Tollbooth is now a line of code. Voya. The playbook is 500 years old. Only the terminology has changed. Freedom of navigation operations or platform terms of service. Casa de India contract equals sovereign debt agreement with austerity clauses or exclusive licensing deal. A spice monopoly equals intellectual property rights, energy dependency, or semiconductor supply chain control. Equals strategic military base, digital gateway, or global banking clearinghouse, SWIFT. The goal remains the same. Use capital and controlled access as a lever to extract wealth and dictate terms, bypassing the cost and complexity of direct political rule. It's imperialism for the spreadsheet age. How to see the system. The Portugal test. Your power lies in recognizing the pattern. Run the Portugal test on any modern geopolitical or economic situation. 1. The debt lever is one party using loans, credit, or a critical resource dependency, energy, chips, software, to gain influence over another's policy or assets. 2. The choke point is control being exerted over a critical gateway, a physical strait, a pipeline, a digital platform, a currency clearing system, a technical standard. 3. The monopoly contract are agreements being signed that create exclusive, long-term dependencies, locking the weaker party into a single supplier, buyer, or technological ecosystem. If you see these three elements converging, you are not watching simple diplomacy or trade. You are watching the Estado da India model playing out on a new. You are witnessing the ancient logic of debt trap monopoly, updated for the present day. From the spice forests of Malacca to the silicon forests of Taiwan, the game is unchanged. Control the gate, own the debt, harvest the profit. Conclusion. Join the minority who see if this deep dive into the forgotten origin of our financial world and seeing its ghost in every modern headline about trade wars, sanctions, and infrastructure loans feels like putting on glasses for the first time. Then you know what this channel is for. We are here to trace the bloodlines of power, to show how the same financial DNA from a 1499 deal in Lisbon is still replicating in boardrooms and government chambers today. The faces, flags, and commodities change, but the machinery of extraction remains hauntingly familiar. The greatest superpower in a world run by ancient blueprints is not wealth or weapons. It is recognition. It is knowing which page of the old playbook they are reading from. Hit subscribe. Let's continue to decode the hidden architectures of power, one forgotten history at a time. Because to navigate the future, you must first understand the deep, enduring patterns of the past.